so far. And so since we are recording this session, I will ask that you please keep your mics off unless Bronwyn or Yunyi invite you to participate or do otherwise. And with that, it is my pleasure to pass things over to our presenters.
Great, thank you so much. So indeed, we have a presentation planned today. And I'm going to start us off with some sort of general comments about how names work and why they're important, and some general tips. And then Yunyi is going to pick up with some more focused practice on pronouncing names for one particular background that's very common here at Queen's, which is Mandarin names. First, can I confirm that people can see my screen? Am I successfully screen sharing and you can't see my notes? Wonderful.
You're successfully sharing.
So thank you, Alyssa, so much for the kind introduction. I am Bronwyn Bjorkman, and I'm here today from Vancouver, where I am spending a term on sabbatical. This is the traditional territories, traditional unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And names in a public context are a very visible aspect of the landscape in Vancouver, as there's been increasing efforts to have Indigenous names publicly visible on schools, on libraries, on street signs, on highways. And there's a lot of anxiety about that because the sounds of the Salish languages that are spoken locally are very different from English names. And so people see these names and aren't sure where to start. And I think sometimes aren't sure why it's important. So that's sort of been in the back of my mind while talking about this. But the place that I'm actually going to start is with my own name. So my own name is Bronwyn Bjorkman, and this gets mispronounced a lot, both the first name and the last name. So the NW is apparently very difficult in Bronwyn. So I get called Brownin, I get called Bronwyn, I get called Brownwyn. The BJ is unfamiliar to many people. So many people, if somebody says something that starts with a B and hesitates, I always assume that's my name. And so I'm sure that many of you have had a similar experience. So actually, just to see how this works, can I invite people to use the reactions to give a checkmark yes if you feel that you've had the experience of people mispronouncing your name regularly. And you can give the red X if you have not had that experience. Let's see if I can find a way to show that. Okay. Do I have any emoji reactions of yes or no?
We've got a couple of
I have yeses. A couple of a check mark and a thumbs up. Yep, from people. Some people have not had the experience of having their name regularly mispronounced. Right, so I see that several, we're sort of adding up the yeses and nos. So yeah, this is a fairly common experience. And sometimes it's not just the pronunciation of your name, it's also sort of the structure of your name. So another very boring example from my own name is that my actual full name is Bronwyn Elma Moore Bjorkman. And this causes all kinds of confusion because people don't expect to see a name inside a name. People don't expect to see a last name as a middle name. And so I have actually managed to rent a car as Alma Moore because someone didn't know how to read my driver's license to put the right name on the contract. So that's an experience that I have with names, and I have a whole store of funny stories about my name. But at the same time, my name is legible within a sort of European cultural context. So I go by my legal first name. I have middle names, which is a particular convention. I have a name that fits into computer systems here in Canada, specifically in an Anglophone context. So while I have all of these funny stories about people getting my name wrong, I also, and some of you may also, experience a the privilege of coming from a white Anglophone Canadian background, even if you have a difficult name. And that's not true for all difficulties with names that we encounter. So lots of people encounter even more, why am I failing to come up with a word right here at the beginning of the presentation? Lots more pushback on their names, lots more mistakes, without that sort of background of privilege of your name being a normal name in some way. So this is, this sort of comes out in different kinds of naming practices. So something that I wanted to highlight by bringing out the question of middle names and how middle names work is that we bring with us to people's names assumptions about how names are going to work. And those aren't always repeated in other places. So here I want to invite you to share either in the chat or by using the raise hand function. Can anybody think of different practices around names, different ways that names work that don't fit these assumptions that Anglophone or really European and North American society assume about names? So we might do an easy starting one about the order of names. Right, so many people in many places, family name, particularly in East Asia, the convention is that family names come first and then personal names. There are other, do people know other variations on ordering? Some of these you'll find. Right, so Pamela has commented in the chat that in Spanish, you always have two last names. So in sort of Anglophone contexts, people sometimes have a double-barreled last name. But in Spain, you would have two last names, one from your father, one from your mother. And they're written in a variety of ways. So this leads to mistranslations into English, where people assume that only one of those is the real last name and the other one's a middle name. Idiosyncratic. Yes, this is a common thing that Alyssa has pointed out, that in many families, it's common for particularly men, but people in general, to go by a middle name. So this is a practice that's common in Europe. In fact, in my mother's family, it's the same thing. My uncle's name is Charles Kevin Moore, and he is my Uncle Kevin. And yeah, so people should feel free. Yeah, we've got one more. For some Muslims, Muhammad is a first name and then you go by a middle name. Yeah, so having sort of culturally set or religiously set parts of your name. In Poland, you must sign all official documents with your first and last name, otherwise it's not valid. Whereas in, some traditions, again, I'm thinking of East Asia, you sign your name with a stamp is the official way that you sign your name, certainly in Japan, with a chop. And that's, you don't handwrite a signature, you use a stamp that's carved. Let's see, what ones did I come up with to put on here? A few others are transparently meaningful names. So in English, we usually don't have, sometimes your name has a meaning, but it's usually historical. Whereas in many languages, people's names transparently are words that have meaning. We've talked about the parts of a name, whether you have middle names or don't, but also whether you have a family name and how family names work. So in many traditions, you have a single name. Patronymics or matronymics. So whether you always have a family name that is actually just indicates who you're the child of. So if I had a matronymic named for my mother, I would be Bronwyn, let's keep it Swedish, Shona's daughter. And then we talked about compound family names. So if somebody's name differs from how you expect names to work in one of these ways, that's sort of a separate from pronunciation difficulty that names have. So when we bring names into the context of Canada, in the context of Queens, we enforce certain things about how names are supposed to work. And I'll return to that point in a minute. Why do names matter? Like, why do we care? So philosophers and linguists often talk about names as being rigid designators. They're things that point to people in the world. But names aren't just labels for people. And there's this nice quote here: names do as well as say things. So names aren't just a neutral sort of pointing arrow towards a person. They often say things about our social identity, about our cultural connections, about our history, whether that's with our first names or our personal names or our family names. But they also are part of how we construct that identity. And you can see that maybe most clearly from the ways that people change their names in order to present or construct parts of their identity. So when this is common at major life changes, so when a trans person adopts a new name to better reflect their gender, when somebody changes their name when they get married, that's a cultural practice. But if somebody changes their name because of a difficult relationship with family and they decide to end a family connection, that's sort of the fact that all of these are highly significant personal choices show us what we do with names, what we do with our own names, but also what we do with other people's names. So for these reasons, this is part of why a name is such a significant thing about a person's presentation of their identity. But through names, we get this pressure to assimilate. So this is true in Canada, but also specifically here at Queen's. So when somebody, there's been a long history of the Canadian government, either when people immigrate to Canada or for Indigenous people, enforcing renaming on people to bring them into a European cultural mold. So that is a long-standing practice. A relatively minor one, again, to link it back to my own name, the fact that I don't have umlauts on Bjorkman is an example of the sort of pressure to, in that very small way, assimilate into how names are supposed to work. This can involve giving people entirely new names or giving them last names or family names, imposing that cultural practice. This happens here at Queen's. So particularly Queen's computer systems have very strong opinions about how names are supposed to work. They have to be in Roman characters. A lot of computers won't deal with symbols that aren't used to write English. And they enforce, the most obvious I ever saw for a student is that Queen's enforces having two names. So I did once have a student who did not have a family name, personal name distinction. And Queen's insisted that they had to have the same name, not an individual person, but the infrastructure of Queen's insisted that they had to have the same name appear in both spaces. It took a little bit of communication to figure out what was going on there. Then in a social context, you'll get micro and macro aggressions against foreign names. So just the difficulty of people accommodating a name that they perceive as being not of here. So the impression that people can give that by having a different name, you are enforcing, you are making them do something. So that can happen in a bunch of different ways. Nope. Okay, so here I'm definitely going slower than I thought, so I'm not going to ask you to tell me ways of misnaming, though I invite you to put more in the chat if you think of ones that I have missed. So we've talked a fair amount about mispronunciation. So you can mispronounce somebody's name as a way of misnaming them, intentionally or unintentionally. Anglicizing names. So this is something that is particularly common with names that have different versions in different languages. So taking somebody whose name is Rachel and saying that it's Rachel, and treating those as being the same name. And then there's also the imposition of an entirely new, easier name. So that's something that is part of sort of what has been imposed on people historically, saying, oh, your name is too difficult, I'm going to call you John. Okay, so the power of names are important and therefore they have power. And the power of naming and misnaming sort of go hand in hand. So the pronunciation of names in a sort of day-to-day context is a place where our sort of dominant linguistic and social structure enforces integration. So it's a particular thing that happens a lot. So even while we're speaking English, deciding how names are going to be pronounced is a site of either imposition or negotiation about how we're going to deal with sort of multilingual and multicultural settings. And this is a nice quote from Karen Panesi at Western, saying, immigrants' naming choices can be seen as small political acts moving towards social transformation. So the act of saying, no, I'm not accommodating my name to an English standard is part of creating a multicultural context. Alyssa has commented in the chat that along with misnaming, imposing a nickname on people. So saying to someone, oh, your name is Elizabeth, therefore I get to call you Liz, without checking in with you. Yes, very common. So how do people perceive being misnamed? There are a couple of studies, both of the ones that I've cited here, Zhang and Knowles and Buckles, are studies of students' experiences of being misnamed, very different studies, but arriving at the sort of reporting the view that people find it, I know you will be astonished, that people find it disrespectful when their name is mispronounced. But also linguistically injurious as something that's done to them. Not just a neutral thing that happens, but as something that is done to people. And thinking about the experience of continually correcting names, that puts a lot of labor on people, which if somebody is in a marginalized situation already, asking people to do the continual labor of correcting names essentially enforces subtly and continuously, like, you don't belong here. Your name isn't legible to this your name is not a name in this context. And you need to it's your job to fix that. So yes, people are sharing their most hated nicknames in the chat. And yes, if you are continually misnamed, you might be more subtle, more aware of what other people, not to misname other people. It might be that we've all accidentally called someone by a name it turns out that they didn't use or don't use anymore if they used to use a name and have stopped using it. And so none of this is meant to be like, if you have ever done this, you are a bad person. This is an opportunity for us to reflect on our own naming practices. I'm going to very briefly talk about some tips for pronouncing non-English names at a very general level. So, okay, we've been talking about names, and most of what I've said applies to any name. It applies to Bronwyn Bjorkman just as much as it applies to names that are perceived as being more foreign, air quotes very much intentional, or non-English, names that people feel a need to assimilate into English. But these experiences are all particularly pronounced for international students, people coming from outside of Canada, or people generally from a non-Anglophone background, whether they grew up in Canada or have moved to Canada. So some very general tips. I want to emphasize that none of us is going to be perfect at pronouncing names that are from another linguistic background, from another language, or at least from a language that we don't speak. So our best is good enough, but we have to make sure that it's actually our best. So some quick examples, maybe I'll only talk about R, but I can't roll my R's. Can't roll my R's, have tried for 20 years as a linguist to learn how. So I am therefore never going to say a Spanish name with an R in it, like it would be said in Spanish. And the line for being respectful is not that I miraculously tomorrow learn how to roll my R's. It's that I do as many other things as I can in pronouncing names. Same thing, so whether you say Bach or Bach is a similar point. Tone languages, English doesn't have tone, Anglophones are bad at hearing tone. The flip side of that is that other people get to be the authority on how to pronounce their names. So somebody doesn't have to pronounce their name the way it is said in the other language. They get to say how you're going to say it. I will pick up with more examples of that later if we have time. What's the positive side? The positive side is that spelling in other languages is more reliable than it is in English. So you can usually try, those letters might not make the same sounds that they do in English, but if you just assume that the spelling is not lying to you, you will get very far in pronouncing non-English names. And this is particularly true of vowels. Assume that you are pronouncing vowels from other European languages. And there are tips on approaching long names where you start at the end and you go syllable by syllable to get to very long names. But I do want to make sure that Yunyi has enough time to present. So we can come back to this if people have questions. But in the meantime, I'm going to cede the floor to her before I'll come back with a wrap up. Where's the stop button?
Okay, thank you, Bronwyn. Let me share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see my PowerPoint and without notes. So I will now take over the floor to introduce Chinese pronunciation. Okay, this is usually how I introduce myself. Hello, my name is Yunyi Chen. However, this is actually not my real name. Okay, so this is my real name. The Latin alphabet only represents or serves as the sound or pronunciation, which doesn't tell you much about my name, such as the meaning of each character, and the alphabet also doesn't help with the accurate pronunciation of Chinese names. And I'll explain the reasons later. So I happen to notice in our group today, there is another Mandarin speaker. I made the assumption based on your name. If you're not a Mandarin speaker, I apologize. So when I look at her name, I might not be able to pronounce her name exactly as it is, or when she looks at my name, she might not be able to figure out what will be the accurate pronunciation. Okay, so just for information, Chen is one of the most common family names in my country, which descends from around 2200 BC, and the character of Chen means to describe, and the character of Yun means sunlight, and the one of Yi means comfortable. So my grandfather gave me this name because I was born on a warm and sunny day in autumn, which happened to be his birthday as well. So my name means a lot to me as it reminds me of my grandpa as well as his love. So right after I moved to Canada as an international student, I quickly realized that some folks seem to feel troubled by my name. They either choose to not call me or call me Y-U-N-Y-I. Some of them tried to learn my name but felt too embarrassed to continue after trying a few times. It became such a problem that impacted my academic and social life. So I decided to pick an English name for myself, which made things so much easier, especially when I went to Starbucks for coffee. So I kept my English name for a few years until I participated in a discussion about identity in one of the last year courses. In the discussion, I shared with my peers that my English name was not my real name. I gave it to myself so others won't feel troubled by trying to pronounce my real name. I remember there was a pause of silence in the group, and then eventually a classmate said, "I'm sorry that you felt this way, but learning how to pronounce your name should not be a trouble for anyone, and I want to learn how to say it. Even if I won't be able to say it perfectly, I want to learn." So I spent the rest of the discussion teaching my group how to pronounce my name. In a post-discussion sharing, I said to the whole group or the whole class that I want to switch back to my real name as it represents who I truly am. I liked my English name too, but I always felt some pieces of me were missing in the English name, and my such as my love to my grandpa and my connection to my heritage. So I did switch back to my real name. It was challenging at the very beginning for my classmates and the professor because they were used to calling me by my English name. But I truly appreciate their persistence that they could all pronounce my real name smoothly before the semester ended. I was inspired by this experience to do the same when I encountered names that I didn't know how to pronounce. I know that I won't be able to perfectly pronounce every name I encounter, but I project my respect in the effort to learn different pronunciations despite the challenges. So I guess the willingness to learn and the sense of responsibility to respect are something I'm trying to advocate in the session today. Okay, here are the anticipated outcome of this interactive piece of this presentation. So firstly, I would introduce the components of Pinyin in Mandarin Chinese and identify some basic sounds in Pinyin. I will then provide an opportunity for you to practice the basic sounds and try to pronounce a few Chinese names. I hope this interactive piece of the presentation provides you a taste of Chinese pronunciation that helps increase your interests in learning different pronunciations. Okay, before we begin the session, I would like to also share with you what the session is not intended to do. So this is not a training session that aims to help you become the experts in pronouncing Chinese names. You will still feel challenged by Chinese pronunciation after the session. What I can do is to provide some resources at the end of the session so you can keep practicing Chinese pronunciation. The effort we put in such practices also helps remove the burden from students to have to repeat their names over and over again to teach us. I fully understand that it is not easy to pronounce names in languages that we don't speak, as Bronwyn just alluded, and it shouldn't be a solo effort. We need to all work together and use technology to help us pronounce each other's name better. So I'll be introducing a technology as well. Okay, there is no hierarchy in the diverse languages we speak at Queen's. The only reason we use Chinese Pinyin in the sessions because I am an easy resource to use. If there are interests and support from our community, we are open to make a series of sessions to include pronunciations of different languages. I also would like to acknowledge that mispronunciation of names is a challenge shared by everyone in our community, regardless of our language backgrounds. Therefore, it is also everyone's responsibility to learn from one another to build meaningful relationships and develop an inclusive inclusive environment for everyone. Okay, something funny I want to share before I talk about Pinyin. So somehow my family was convinced I am teaching Mandarin Chinese in Canada as my career after I told them I work as an educational developer at the Center for Teaching and Learning. In fact, this is the very first time I tried to teach Chinese in my 9 years of living in Canada. I guess I will know soon enough if I can make this my career or not. Without further ado, let's explore Pinyin. So what it is. Okay. So Pinyin is the phonetic system of Mandarin Chinese. It is the most widely used system of writing and reading that uses the Latin alphabet. Most importantly, it is a great tool that helps us learn the accurate pronunciation of Mandarin words, as well as input Chinese characters into our computer or smartphones. Okay, so a quick introduction to the Mandarin Chinese, which is composed of two individual systems, the phonetic system, Pinyin, and the writing system, different characters. Okay, here is an example of how I send a text message. So I firstly type the Pinyin of the words and then choose the characters that represent what I'm trying to say. So as you can see here, different characters could share the same alphabet. When I type L and I, there are a wide spectrum of characters that I can choose from. Okay, this is how I use Pinyin to help me choose characters. In general, Pinyin is composed of an initial, a final, and a tone. Okay, this is why alphabet itself doesn't help with accurate pronunciation in Mandarin Chinese, and the tones play an important role. There are in general 4 tones we use in Mandarin Chinese: the flat tone, rising tone, falling, rising tone, and falling tone. Okay, with different tones, the same Pinyin alphabet could represent different characters and have different meanings. For example, if I attach the flat tone, the first tone, to the alphabet M and A, it means mother. Okay, and the rising tone makes the same alphabet fiber. Falling and rising tone makes it horse, and the falling tone makes this alphabet a verb, to scold. Okay, so I won't go in depth with the tones, just offering you a very brief introduction so you know the tones play a very important role in Mandarin Chinese. Okay, a quick snapshot of the initials and finals. Based on this chart, there are 23 initials and 24 finals in Pinyin. I remember when I learned Pinyin as a kid many years ago. This is not how I learned it. So I'm not sure if there is any updates in the Pinyin system. If you know anything about it, please feel free to share with the rest of us. You also don't need to worry about memorizing the finals and initials, as long as you know that there are different finals and initials in Mandarin Chinese. It is great. Okay. So now, after I introduce the Mandarin Chinese as a language, I introduce the components of Pinyin, let's try some basic sounds in Pinyin. And I'm suggesting that we begin with finals, as finals might be easier to pronounce. Okay, so when I introduce the sound, I would like to encourage everybody to pronounce with me, to practice with me and try with me. I won't be able to hear you, so it's okay just to try by yourself. And also my Mandarin speaking colleague in the session, if you notice I mispronounce any Pinyin, please let me know. Because I grew up speaking a dialect, which is different than Mandarin. So I learned Mandarin at school. I usually talk in a dialect from my hometown. So the first one is ah, like open your mouth wide open, ah, like in father, ah. Okay, please read after me to practice. Ah, ah. And the second one is an, like in and, an. Okay. The third one is slightly more challenging. It's like in sound. So you can say N is a front nasal sound, while is a back nasal sound. Okay, so and Number 4, this one is a bit tricky. I'm trying to find an English word for it. I think it might be similar to fur, but without rolling the R. In Pinyin, it sounds like Okay, please try after me. Okay, And number 5 is Once again, it's a front nasal sound. We begin with and add like a front nasal sound. And number 6 is Okay, I wasn't able to find an English word. So basically, it's the N plus a nasal sound. We start from the simple vowel, prolong it, and then move our tongue backwards. Meanwhile, let the air come out through our nose. The NG sound is similar to the NG sound in the English word tongue. Okay, but our mouth is wider open. Okay, N, will be the 3 sounds. How are we doing right here? If you feel challenged, it's okay. So let's move on to more final sounds. I hope those are easier. So number 7 is very easy. E, it's a longer E, like in B. E, okay, I hope you're trying. Okay. E, E. And number 8 is E and A together. E, A. Ya, like in Yahoo. Ya, ya, ya. Okay, so number 9 is E plus N. Yan, yen. It sounds like yen in Japanese, their currency. Okay, yen, yen, yen. And number 10 is also our last final sounds to share is E plus ang, yang, yang. It sounds similar to young, but the tone is slightly different. Young. Okay, I hope you're trying. Young. E, ya, yen, young. Okay. So those are 10 final sounds. And let's go over to the initials. It's time for us to try some initials. It might be more challenging. So number 11, to pronounce the sound, roll our tongue and let the tip of our tongue to touch the hard palate. Let the air come out from the sides of our tongue. Okay, it's like ooh, ooh, ooh. I know it's very challenging. So to make the sound clear, it is helpful to add a final to pronounce it together. Okay, L. I hope this one's easier for you. Can you please try with me? L, L, L. Number 12. So this sound is like H in him, but with a bit more fraction in the throat. So when pronouncing it, we can feel there is a puff of air coming through your mouth. Okay. To make the sound clear, we once again add the final to sound them together. H, H, H. Okay. So number 13. I hope this one is easier. So this sounds like she, but much softer. Okay. So raise the front of the tongue toward, but not touching the hard plate, and then let the air squeeze out. Shh, shh, shh. Okay. To help you with the pronunciation, I add the final E to the end so we can pronounce them together. She, she, she. Yeah, I see Bronwyn shared in the chat that this one's tricky because it's different from the sound she makes in English. Okay, so I hope I've helped you pronounce some of the sounds. You may find one or two of them easy to pronounce, the others might be more challenging. So I have a few more before we go and practice. So I hope those ones are easier. So number 14 is z, like in kids. Z, z. Okay, please try it together with me. Z. Okay, number 15 is s, like in cats. S, s, s. Number 16 is s, like in dress. S, 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 z, s, s. Okay, I hope you found them easier to pronounce, and the other ones might be harder. We have 17, 18, and 19. They're similar with the first three sounds, but we have to roll up the tip of our tongue against the hard plate and loosen it to let the air come out. So number 17 is zh. So there's a roll in the tongue. Zh, zh. Okay, number 18 is ch, ch, ch. And number 19 is sh, sh, sh. Okay, so let me try again. So from 14 to 19, can you please try together with me? Z, s, s, r, sh, sh. Okay, so how do you feel right now? I've shared like a 19 Chinese pinyin sound with you. And I have my colleague here sharing number 17, 18, 19 are so difficult. Yes, they are difficult even for me to pronounce. What's more challenging is for me to switch back from the English and pinyin alphabet. I'm trying myself very hard to not make a mistake. Okay, So they are similar in a way, but they're also very different. I guess the hardest part is to really try how to roll up your tongue and add the rolling sounds. Okay, I may try one more time and then you can go off and to practice. Okay. Z, r, sh, sh, s, sh. Okay, so this is the best I can do. So I guess practice makes perfect. We should probably practice more after the session. Okay, so I guess time for us to experience a little bit of the different tones. Okay, so I hope you remember the H here sounds like in Pinyin, and ah, ha, ha. So I pronounce the flat sound. Start high, stays there. Ha, ha. Please try after me. Okay. Ha, ha. And number 2 is a rising tone. Ha, ha, ha. Okay, rising a little bit. Ha, ha. Okay, number 3 is the rising falling tone. We start at the middle range, dip slow, and ends middle range. So ha, 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 ha. Can you sense the change there? Ha. Okay, and number 4 is the falling tone. Ha, ha. Okay, so let's try again. Okay, ha, 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 ha. Yeah, I remember when I was learning in Pinyin as a kid, this is what my teacher tried to help us to using her hand to help us understand how the tone helps with the pronunciation. Okay, so ha, 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 ha would be the different tones we use in Mandarin Chinese. Okay, so I wonder if Lisa can help me drop the Pinyin cheat sheet in the chat. I found it's really challenging for myself to do it with my screen shared. So I developed a cheat sheet for you to practice the different sounds. I'll give you maybe 1 or 2 minutes to really practice the sounds. And if you have any questions, you want me to help you with any pronunciation, please feel free to let me know. And after this quick practicing phase or period, I will maybe invite some of you, if you feel comfortable, to pronounce any of the Chinese names you find you are most comfortable pronouncing. Okay, so counting down to 60 seconds. So to answer your question, Alisa, I think it makes sense. In Mandarin Chinese, if you ask a question, we often add a specific character at the end of the sentence to represent it's a question, and it's usually the rising tone, the second one. So I think you're right. Okay, I hope we're all doing okay with the Chinese pronunciation. Now, I'm just wondering if anyone in our group today feels comfortable to try any sounds from 1 to 12, pick up one and try to pronounce as a challenge to yourself. It might be scary and challenging. I understand if you don't want to, which is okay.
I will try the first one, but I'm very bad at falling rising tone. So Li.
Very
Nope,
good. That's actually perfect.
Oh.
Yes. Good job, Bronwyn Li. Yes, exactly. One of the most common Chinese family name could also be a first name depending on the character. Very good. Thank you so much.
Okay, I don't think I'll be as successful as Bronwyn, but I'll try. Xia, Xia, Xia.
Closer. Xia.
Xia.
Yes, much better. So ya, xia, xia. Okay. Very close. Thank you, Alyssa. Maybe one more from our group today before I hand the floor back to Bronwyn. I wonder if anyone wants to try another sound. I know this is very scary.
Okay,
We also have a very small group today.
I will try one.
For sure.
This is Sandra. Oh, I shouldn't have
Hi,
said my
Sandra.
name. Darn.
Okay.
I'm gonna try number 9.
Okay.
Sheng. Sheng.
Okay, that's very close. So it's zhang,
Zhang. Zhang.
zhang. Yes,
Zhang.
yes, yes, yes. Very good, very good. Zhang. Yes, very good, Sandra.
Chen. Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for your participation. I hope you feel interested in pronouncing other languages now. I will hand the floor back to Bronwyn. I will stop sharing.
Great, and I will start sharing again. If people can give me a thumbs up if you can see this slide, a slide that should say better classroom practices. So just looking at the time, I'm going to talk about this for a couple of minutes, then we'll wrap up. And if you want to start putting questions into the chat already, you are welcome to do that. So I don't want to say that these are best classroom practices, but these are better classroom practices. So first steps towards making, focusing on the university setting, making a classroom more welcoming to a wider variety of names. And I tried to boil it down to 3, partly because of how it's easy to put things on a screen and the Queen's colors. But no, I think these are 3 reasonable practices. The first is not to, I'm gonna go through these. The first is not to signal out individual names as difficult. When we wanna be polite, it's easy to stop before an individual name and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm probably going to get your name wrong. And all that does is it flags that that person has an odd name. You think they have a funny name. So that's something that I find it very difficult to avoid, but that we should really all try to avoid. One way to do that is to start off a whole list of names by saying, you know, I'm going to read, let's say you're taking attendance. I'm going to read out people's names. If I mispronounce your name, or if you prefer to go by a different name, feel free to correct me now or get in touch with me later. So don't require people to flag publicly, but give them the opportunity to correct you in several ways. And that you might be surprised at what names you get corrected on. A second one is asking students how to be addressed and then following their preferences. So I'm sure that many of us do this already, but starting with the beginning of the semester, asking students for preferred names. And that might identify for you students who choose to use an English name that doesn't appear on the roster, or students whose roster name at Queen's is still an English name, but they would prefer to use their Chinese name, to use the example that Yunyi was talking about. It'll also capture students. Maybe you have a student, trans student who has recently changed their name and it's not reflected in records. You have a student who insists on or really strongly prefers a nickname. And we have technology, so you can ask students even to record themselves. In linguistics classes, I can try to get students to use the International Phonetic Alphabet with mixed success. But you can do surveys where students can record things. I think it's also great to tell your classes, have information on cue, giving them the resources for how you can set preferred names here at Queen's, both in on cue and at the university level. A last thing, and this is something that Yunyi talked about, make an effort to learn on your own. Don't expect students to do the work for you of telling you how to pronounce the names. So you can review names in advance, flag the ones that you're uncertain of, and the internet is a miraculous resource that will often give you results. If you say, if you enter in name pronunciation, you will usually get some videos on YouTube of how to pronounce names. Or if you think it can be hard to identify, if you aren't familiar with names, it can be hard to identify their origin. But if you know that something is a Mandarin name, for example, or you're pretty sure it is, you can look up, you can open your notes on Pinyin and look things up that way. So some final thoughts. This is really about creating a more respectful environment for students and for people in all parts of our lives. So we do need to make this effort, even for those of us who might think of ourselves as being bad at pronouncing unfamiliar names or bad at pronouncing words that aren't from a language that we speak. There are simple ways to practice and also to be more inclusive, even if you get individual sounds wrong, to make it clear that you are making a best effort. Here are some references, but I have shared these slides to the chat, and I am actually going to stop sharing. There we go. So that we have a few minutes for questions. So thank you, everyone.
I just dropped a few resources in the chat. So the first two are the tools to help you with pronouncing Mandarin Chinese. And the third one is the name coach. That's the technology I would hope we can all use. I also dropped an example in the chat. If we all develop our own name badge, so we will be able to help others pronounce our names better. If you click into the example, you will see me, my photo, my name, like how to pronounce my name, the meaning of my name, and we can easily insert the name badge into our signature through email or use it on cue or many other ways. So I think it's a great way we can help each other pronounce our names better.
Thank you so much, Bronwyn and Yunyi. This has been fabulous. I am so appreciative. I feel like I've learned so much. We do have just a couple minutes. Can I open up the chat to the group, this discussion to the group? Are there any questions for Bronwyn or Yunyi?
Or any other best practices that other people have from their own experience, either as a person whose names are gotten incorrectly or as a teacher or in other contexts? Well, I am trying to copy something that I can put in the chat.
I would just like to thank you both, because that was incredible. Thank you very much. I've learned, as Alyssa said, I've learned a lot from this, because I'm a classic one for getting names wrong. And some of this stuff is going to help me too when I sort of call out names at convocation. So I'm going to be able to use some of this in that too. So thank you. And these resources are fabulous, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, some of my own background was actually, I had conversations with a colleague at University of Toronto who used to run training for reading names at convocation. It was a linguist and an opera professor, covered different parts of best practices for reading aloud.
Well, you definitely don't want me to sing it, but I can try reading it. So,
I would love to hear you sing it, Colette.
maybe another time.
So I'm just seeing lots of thanks in the chat to you both. I'll take this opportunity then to remind everyone that we did record this session. Those recordings will be available as soon as possible. I am not going to commit myself to a time or date just yet. So if you have any colleagues or folks in your network who you think would benefit from listening to this session, I really encourage you to share that link. I'm just going to put our feedback form in the chat there. This is the first year that we're running this conference, but it's something we're hoping to run on an annual basis, or at least, celebrate International Education Week on an annual basis. And so your feedback is really, really valuable. I'm also going to share, I hope this works, but I'm going to share a link to the Queen's University International Center's Instagram account. And all week we're running a campaign called Hello, My Name Is, where different folks are sharing a 1-minute video of how they say their name and any challenges or strategies they have around pronouncing names. And so I encourage you to follow along quick stories. You click on the little icon on Instagram to see those stories and to keep an eye out for those videos. Bronwyn, Yunyi, once again, thank you so much. This was fabulous. And thank you to everyone who joined us today and participated. And I hope I will continue to see you for the rest of International Education Week.